Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we are setting up my reading journal for the month of August. I am going to be doing things a little bit differently this month. I received a comment from Tracy suggesting that I do a bee theme, and I loved that idea, so I'm going to go ahead and do a bee theme for my August setup. So I am going to be using a little bit of different materials this month than I normally do. And kind of in doing that, I'm going to have to mess around with my layouts a little bit. So I tried to plan this out as best as I could, but I'm just not in the right creative mind, I guess, to plan this out, since I haven't done a spread like this since probably last year sometime. So I'm going to just wing it and hope for the best. So like I said, I am doing a bee theme, and I wanted to show you some of the bee products that I have. So I've got this stencil, a Tim Holtz stencil of Honeycomb. I don't know yet if I'm going to use that because I did find a bunch of bee scrapbook paper. So I trimmed this down already. I had 3 pieces of this bee paper, and it's kind of got a gold foil on it, so I really like it. And then the back has this honeycomb. So I'm not 100% sure if I'll need to use this stencil because I've got this paper. I also pulled out some craft paper from one of my Archer and Olive paper pads. This one specifically, that's got the black, white, and craft paper, dot grid paper in it. So I just pulled a couple of pieces of that off because I think I'm going to be doing like a kind of like a scrapbooky type look with this particular spread. I also have, these are newer purchases. I got these from Michael's because I realized that I have, of all of the stamps that I have no bee stamps. So I looked on Michael's website and I found both of these, and I figured that they both come with like little florals and stuff too. So I will definitely be able to use these outside of just having the 3 little bee stamps. So I might even end up using some of these in my spread today, some of the florals, but now I've got a couple of little tiny bee stamps that I can use. I have my Ranger Pebble Beach ink. This is probably my favorite Ranger ink pad and the one that I used most frequently out of the 4 that I own. And then I am going back to my tried and true for my letters, my titles this month. I'm just going to use my little alphabet stamp set that I got from Amazon. And then I also have my Pigma Micron 05, 003, and 01 in the brown, or the sepia colorway, pulled out in case I need to do any lines. And then off to the side here, in case I need to do any additional layering outside of these 3 things, I've got a couple of other patterned papers pulled out. This is like a really pale brownie pink. And then I found another bee print that I really liked. This one has a little bit of yellow in it and also has gold foiling, so I think it'll look really good next to that other one. And then I have my third piece of paper that I've already shown. And then the last thing that I have pulled out to the side over here is just some random kind of patterned paper in case I wanted to bring like a little bit more yellow or more pink and gold into it. I've got like these 3 papers in here that I have not used yet that I can mess around with. There's also like little ledger papers in here too. Like this one I think would go really well, that I can use if I wanted to have some lines for potentially like my reading log and stuff like that. So like I said, I do not really have too much planned, so hopefully this video won't be too long since I'm going to be kind of working off the cuff here. But while I am doing this setup, I'm going to be listening to High Achiever by Tiffany Jenkins. I have not, honestly, I was just kind of scrolling through my Audible because I just finished the last book I was reading last night. So I needed to find a new book anyways. So I think I'm going to listen to this one while I'm doing my setup today. The little caption right here says the incredible true story of one addict's double life. And that really kind of intrigued me. Let me know down in the comments below if you ever read the book Smack. I can't remember off the top of my head who the author is, but it's about a girl who gets addicted to heroin. And that book, I read that in high school and it has lived with me. I think about it all the time. So when I saw this like cover image and then the little caption, I was very intrigued because I felt like it might be as impactful as that book was. I don't know. I guess I'll see. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read this book or if you've read Smack and what your thoughts were on it. All right, let us jump right in. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get my new stamps open, and then I'm going to kind of separate out a couple of ones that I think I might want to use in my spreads today. I do end up only using one of the flower or two of the flowers and all three of the bees. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my papers pulled over that I had already pre-cut to fit my B5 bullet journal. And then I'm going to kind of flip them over back and forth and figure out which side I want to go with. I do decide on the hexagon side, and I'm going to rip both sides of each piece of paper and get those adhered down to my pages. Once I get these adhered down, I'm going to pull over one of my craft dot grid pages, and I'm going to stamp out August 2023 for my monthly cover page. And then I'm going to rip this out to place across one of my hexagon patterns. I didn't realize how much more difficult it is to rip craft paper than it is to just rip regular paper. So I do struggle a little bit when it comes to that, and it doesn't rip as straight as I would have liked. Though it does give it a little bit more of an organic rip, so I do end up just kind of leaving it as is. And before I rip the bottom, I tried to add a small crease to that to see if it'll help keep my rip a little bit straighter. I end up not fussing with it too much because I didn't want it to turn into something that I disliked and I needed to redo. And I was happy with the way that this came out, so I'm going to go ahead and get that adhered down as well. The next thing I'm going to do is pull out the other side of that craft cardstock, that craft dot grid paper, and I'm going to kind of make it a little bit smaller and rip all edges of that. On this little piece of cardstock that I'm going to put on the left-hand side, I am going to add my monthly calendar. I do pull out that scrap of brownie pink paper, floral paper, and I'm going to add a small piece to both of my pages. I was going to add it on the left side, and I wanted to also get that added to the right side as well, so it kind of was across my spread instead of just randomly on one page. So I'm getting that adhered down behind my title, and then I will get it adhered down behind that craft dot grid paper on the left hand side. Once I have that down, I am going to stamp one of the flowers that I pulled out from my newer block stamps, and I'm going to stamp that in the corner after I get my tape runner refilled. I'm going to get that stamped in the corner of the dot grid paper and then draw two kind of border lines along either side of the dot grid paper. I'm not going to do a border all the way around. I'm just going to do on the right side and the bottom side. I tried to use my thinnest sepia micron pen, but I think it's like dying or something, so I switched over to my 01 micron and used that instead. The next thing I'm going to do is actually pull out my hexagon stencil after I get my month stamped out. I'll get that stamped out, and then I'm going to pull out my hexagon stencil. So when I originally pulled this out, I had envisioned that I would be ink blending over the top of it. However, since I used a lot of papers and cardstocks and dot grid pages, I thought ink blending would be just a little bit too much. So what I ended up doing was just tracing my micron around some of the hexagons, some of the honeycombs, if you will. And I really, really loved the way that this ended up looking, and I will sprinkle this throughout the rest of my pages in my setup. Looking back at it, I think this might be my favorite thing that I've done for this whole setup was outlining that stencil. So now we are moving on to the first official page. Like I said in the beginning, I do have to redo my pages a little bit, different than what I have been doing. So what I'm going to do for this first page is I'm going to use the gold foiled B side of that paper, and then I pulled a paper out from that Heidi Swap paper pack that I have, one of the ledger papers. And I'm going to use this for my reading log. I'm going to trim out some of the inside portion of that B paper because I'm only going to be using the corner of it, and I wanted to save that instead of just hiding it all behind this ledger paper. I decided to use the ledger paper on this side because for my reading log, I do keep track of the book title, page count, the date I started reading, the date I stopped reading, the genre, and how I read it, the format I read the book in. So I felt like this ledger paper would be perfect for that, and on the left-hand side of the paper, it's already pre-numbered, so I won't have to kind of number out any books. So then I'm going to use my stamp set, my block stamps, to go ahead and stamp reading log on the top of this page, and I think I go ahead and add some more hexagons on this page as well. I do mess up and stamp an F instead of an I in reading log, and I was going to use some of my whiteout to correct that, but this is not a white page, so I decided to pull out a piece of the scrap and see if I could cut out a little portion of it to cover up that F and stamp an I over it, and it worked out really well. You can almost barely notice it. I also pull in a scrap of that honeycomb paper that I had just kind of had sitting on the desk from when I did the last page, and I'm going to just paste that along the bottom to bring that honeycomb into this side as well. The next thing I'm going to do is add a couple of little bee stamps. What I ended up doing was stamping one of them over the honeycomb, and I really didn't like it, so that's when I decided that I'll just bring in that honeycomb stencil again and add it over where I stamped the bees, kind of around them, so that it wouldn't be so awkward looking with the bee that I had stamped on top of the pattern paper. That didn't look too well. So I'll stamp it on both sides, and then, or I'll sketch it on both sides and then go it around the middle-ish of the top to just bring in that honeycomb pattern on top of the paper as well. Then we are going to move on to the next page, and this next page I'm going to title my stats and totals pages. So I'm going to pull another piece of that honeycomb paper, and I'm going to just rip the bottom edge of that and then lay that to the top of my page and kind of just dry fit it there. I'm also going to pull out a scrap of that ledger paper and then a scrap of the B paper from the page that I tore off on the previous spread. And then I'm going to start getting everything laid out. These kind of tiny torn bits, I didn't want to throw them out because I tore them off of the edges of the other papers. So I'm just setting them aside to the side of me on my desk and then pulling them back in as I find needed. I'm going to place these two on the right hand side of the page. I don't want to take up too much room on this page because I am going to add 4 long rectangle pieces over top of the honeycomb for my normal totals for the pages read, books read, number of genres read, and the number of formats read. And then on the bottom part of this page, the big large white space, I'm actually going to grab my 1 1/4 inch or 1 3/4 of an inch. I'm not 100% sure which size I used. I think it was a 1 1/4 of an inch circle punch. And I'm going to circle punch out 4 circles in my craft paper and then 4 circles in that brown pink-ish floral paper that I used on the last page, my title pages. And what I'm going to use those for, I recently downloaded the Storygraph app because I have been seeing people showing the pie graphs that you can get from them, and I am obsessed with them. I love the way it looks. So my thought process for setting up this page was that I would kind of set myself up to have 4 circle spaces, and at the end of July, or the end of August, at the end of August, I can reference the charts that I see from Storygraph and mimic them on top of these little circles that I've created on this page. Right now, my plan is going to be to leave these blank, and then when I go to do my August wrap up, I will fill these in depending on what my results are for the month. But as of right now, I'm really liking the mood pie graph, the pace pie graph, and the page number pie graph. It kind of breaks out pages into, like as of right now for July, I've got a 300 to 499 page section, and then a 500 plus page section. And I just think that's really cool. I'm obsessed with it. So I'm really excited to implement this into my reading journal to have for my August wrap up. I believe for this stats and totals page, the last thing that I am going to do is pull in that pink floral paper again, and I'm going to use that for my heading. I'm just going to rip, it's probably about a 1/2 inch piece of rectangle paper, and I'm going to rip the top and the bottom of it, and then I'm going to stamp out stats and totals. And then I'll kind of tuck that underneath one of the very thin strips on the left-hand side of this page to kind of incorporate it into the spread, and bring that pink up towards the top as well, since I've got it underneath the craft paper at the bottom. I don't have any pink right now on the left-hand page. I might have to go back in later on and add a small piece of pink somewhere. I'm not 100% sure yet if that's going to bother me too much, but if I do, I'll probably end up tucking it right underneath that honeycomb piece on that left-hand page. So the next thing that I'm going to do on this page is just stamp out my totals. And like I said, I'm going to stamp out books, pages, formats, and genres. And then I can kind of write down how many pages I've read, how many books I've read, how many genres I read, and what formats I read for the month. There's really only 4 formats that I would write down. So I'm not leaving myself a ton of space here, so I'm going to add a stamped bee or flower to the other end of those little pieces of craft paper. I am done with this page, I believe, and then I'm going to move on to my last page. This is going to be where I house my favorite book for the month, and I'm going to use both the gold foiled bee paper and then the opposite side, the hexagon side, for my background pages. I'm going to trim that bee paper in half, which I have already done, and tape that to the top and the bottom of the hexagon paper. I had fully intended to tape these down and then rip both sides of the paper. If you've watched my channel, whenever I deal with paper, I love ripping paper. I just love the aesthetic that it is. But I guess I completely forgot about it, and I just taped it down solid edges as is. I don't have a problem with that because I'm going to rip something a little bit later, and it did end up looking great. So yeah, but I had fully intended to rip the sides of this paper and just completely forgot. I am going to trim down my craft paper a little bit. I want it to be just slightly bigger than what like a 2x3 photo would be. So I'm going to get that taped down on top of my pink floral paper, and then I'm going to rip that pink floral paper. I'm just going to rip the top and the bottom, and then I'm going to put it over to my paper trimmer and trim that left side just a little bit. On this paper, I am going to do the same thing that I did for my other craft paper section, where I stamped that flower in the corner, and then I just added a border to the right hand side and the bottom. And then I'm going to stamp a couple of bees in the top left hand corner as well. Once I've got that done, I will stamp out favorite up at the top on top of the pink section. So I'm interested to see how well this works for me, because I do have an empty page to the right. I'm not going to be putting anything on that page just yet. But what I was thinking is that if I have my favorite page right before the beginning of my book review pages, it would kind of segue into my reading recap pages. And your favorite book kind of is the beginning of your reading recap, honestly. So I was thinking that potentially I could use that right hand page to either just write about the book that ended up being my favorite and then move on to the following pages for the rest of my books, or I can just do a small section of that page for my favorite book for August and then move on and add like 1 or 2 more books on that page as well, and just do my favorite book first. I'm not 100% sure just yet, but we'll figure that out when it comes time to do the August wrap up. So I am done setting this up. This is how the final pages ended up looking. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite page ended up being, and leave me a bee emoji if you made it to the end of this video. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye!